Okay, what is going on, ladies and gents? Welcome back to a brand new episode of the number one student podcast in the world, the Student Podcast. Today we've got Josh Bright. Would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah, I'm Josh. I'm part of an architectural assistant. I finished university in June and I'm working in practice now. So I'm here to answer some questions and give overall advice.
So would you class yourself as a part one graduate architect? Because this is where I'm getting confused.
Yeah.
Because I keep calling people graduate architects, but because you're only a part one.
Yeah.
So you're an architectural assistant then? Is that what it's called? Just so I don't get it wrong every time.
Legally, I'm not allowed to comment on anything to do with an architect. I have to be an assistant because obviously it's a protected title. So if I turn around in practice and I was like, oh, I'm an architect.
That's wrong.
That's wrong. Yeah. It's exactly the same as like, I don't know, being a doctor. You can't just walk around and say, I'm a doctor.
Yeah.
It's a protected title. So yeah, legally I have to be a part one architectural assistant.
You have to go through all of the stages to actually say that you're an architect then?
Yeah.
Yeah, all parts of the...
All parts. I mean, there's a new course out now. It's basically like an apprenticeship where you go... I think it's Oxford or Cambridge or somewhere like that. And it's 4 years. You work 4 days a week in practice, 1 day in uni. And you're a qualified architect by 4 years' time.
Really?
Which is good. But then the problem is there's a lot of questions around, do you get a master's degree?
Mm.
Do you actually get your part 3 as like an actual thing, or is it just you're there and you're done? Because like for me, eventually I'd like to go into teaching. Mm-hmm. So for me, I need a master's degree to do that.
Yeah.
So would it still be?
You need probably the full profession.
Right, exactly. Yeah. So
because you want to gather as much. If you want to teach, you want to know as much as humanly possible.
Exactly.
To be able to teach, you need the full qualification for that. But that's quite cool that you can do an apprenticeship. I never actually knew that.
Yeah, it's brand new. It's literally like new this year.
So. But then, how would you cram all 7 years in 4 years?
So it's not all.
So it's just for part one then.
You finish your part one, and it's basically part 2 and part 3 together.
Right. Okay.
So technically now, so I've been in practice 3 months. So I've still got another 6 months in practice realistically. Mm-hmm. Then 2 more years in university, another couple of years out, and then part 3. So I've still got, 5-6 years left until I'm a qualified architect.
It sounds so sad when you say that.
It's scary because, I feel like I've just finished part 1. Yeah. I'm really close. And then I consider how far I've still got to go and I'm like, I'm not. But so it shortens that down. But at the same time, it's like, do I get something that's equivalent to a master's degree? Mm. Because one thing that shocks people sometimes when I say is I didn't actually get into university on A-levels.
Yeah,
I did a BTEC in construction in the built environment, but what it basically focused on was the core of architecture. So legal documents, technical drawings, even surveying, things like that. So I got quite a broad background when I went into university. Mm-hmm. So
set you up nicely.
It was a different route, a really different route.
So going into that, what was it, like college for BTEC then?
Yeah.
So going into college, you know that you wanted to be an architect then?
Going into school, I knew I wanted to be an architect.
So you've known your whole life then?
Known, yeah, like literally my whole life.
Yeah.
I was 3 years old, sat with my nan and granddad because my granddad actually taught me when I was younger how to draw. Mm-hmm. So he'd scribble on like a newspaper if he could. And there's been people in family history who've been like close to becoming draftsmen. Mm-hmm. Like my mum's cousin, I think it was. He basically could have been a draftsman. He was that good. So there's people in my family that have been come close. But even when I was like 3 years old, I was sat there like drawing my nan a conservatory.
That is mad. That's when you know that architecture is 100% your... Because it's a question I get asked a lot. Like I've already mentioned that everyone's always wondering, did you always want to be an architect? Was it one of them things that... Because I feel like in our day, a lot of people don't know what they want to become when they're older, and they spend a lot of time through school, through university, still not knowing what they want to go down. Whereas us two are very, very lucky to know from a very young age. So I've known since I was probably about 5, and that was from doing Lego. Mm-hmm. I loved Lego.
Yeah, I had boxes and boxes full of Lego when I was younger. But I think a lot of it is, I've always been one of those people where if I see something that interests me, I go out and I find everything about it. Yeah. If I like a song, I want to know what the lyrics are. I want to know the backing story for the song because that's just how I am. I like to know things. If I see a film, I want to know everything about it. So I'd have probably been like really young and I was like, oh, architecture, what's that? Mom, Dad, what's architecture? And things like that. So what's
your mum and dad's background?
Were
they architects or?
No. My dad's in transport. He works for Muller, and my mum is a teacher, well, a teaching assistant. So that, I suppose, that's kind of how I've always been used to teachers, because living with one.
Why would you want to be a teacher? Is it just like helping people? Is it sharing your knowledge, or?
Yeah, it's the balance of the two. So, like, for example, when I was in uni last Thursday, like, just speaking to some people and giving them an idea that I'd just pluck out the sky there and then, and they were like, oh, how did I never think of that? Yeah. That's quite rewarding for them to go back to their tutor and say, I've had this idea, and then the tutor likes it. It's like, it's passing on what I've learned. Yeah. And that was really rewarding for me. So, and I mean, I don't know if you remember or not, but like me, Scott and Stu, we did the induction week for you guys, and we did it for the current year 2s.
I think we did,
the walk around Digbeth. So like just little things like that, and like helping out with BIM in Birmingham and stuff like that. It's like all little things that I can get involved with. Yeah. So yeah. Get
on your CV as well.
Yeah.
It's like I recently did a London project where it was like a student competition. Did you have any student competitions when you were?
I think we did the same one.
Did you go in for it?
I didn't go in for it. Just because consciously I knew that, like, with the studio that I was in, it was going to be a lot of hand-drawn work. Yeah. And it wasn't just as easy as like going on a computer and
it wasn't easy at all. No. It was a nightmare.
Yeah, yeah, exactly.
Proper nightmare.
It was a case of me being conscious enough to know that I'm going to have too much work to put something on like that. So especially with how conceptual one of my project to be. So
yeah, some of the work they did for that was unreal. I remember one uni designed an app, like within 2 weeks. It was a 2-week project, and they designed an app fully working. They came in to present with iPads with the app fully working. We were just sat there. We presented second to last, and we were just sat there like watching all these presentations. There was like Bath Uni there was Portsmouth, I think there was Bristol, and then it got to us, and we were just a bit like,
well, I can see why, because some universities focus more as architecture as a method of design rather than buildings. So, I mean, you look at, for example, a university like Bartlett, they're very conceptual. Yeah. So a lot of their graduates will probably end up becoming visual artists rather than architects. Yeah. So I think a lot of it depends on the university that you go to and their design philosophy. But one of the things I mentioned, especially about BCU, is that there's no distinct style. No. When you go, you're allowed to be your own person. If you want to create an app for a building, go for it. There's no constraints to it. So
I think BCU is good for that. I think it does push the creative side of people. I feel like it's more design and creative based than kind of like technical, because I get a lot of people messaging me saying, "Oh, I'm in first year and all I've done is done technical drawings," or "I've spent the whole first year on computer," whereas we didn't have that. We were very much like pen in hand, sketchbook, and we've kind of been pushed along that way, which I think is, for me, works better for me. Obviously some people work in different ways. I personally like being creative, and I like drawing, I like sketching and doing notes on sketchbooks rather than being on the computer all the time.
I think I get why it's very design based, because at the end of the day the role of an architect is to design a building. But there was a guy on YouTube, I cannot remember his name, I'll see if I can find it after. I think it's like Ben Burkus or something like that.
Never heard of him.
It's a very old YouTube channel, he hasn't uploaded in years. And he used to do these videos about like what architecture means, what the role of an architect is, and he went into the foundations of what an architect is, and it comes from, I think it's the Greek or the Roman architecton, which literally translates into master builder. So I've always gone into things with the approach of, again, because of who I am, I should know everything. I should know the technical side of design, I should know the conceptual design, CAD, hand drawn. If I've got a broad range of information, when I'm eventually an architect should be somebody everybody else falls back on. So
you very much, if you go, well, for me, I'm very much, if I'm going to do something, I'm going to do it to like my fullest ability. So you're very much, if I'm going to do something, I'm going to know everything about it, which is a good trait to have, because then when you do become a fully qualified architect, your knowledge is very, very broad. And I feel like that's something I need to do myself. Hence why I'm reading a lot of books at the moment. I'm doing a lot of research into architects to kind of help me broaden my scope in architecture. Because I feel like at uni you are quite you're quite dived into like what you are doing. You don't necessarily broaden your scope.
Yeah.
So I feel like that is something that people need to start doing.
Definitely, and I
sure.
think as well as being detail oriented and that mindset of if I'm going to do something, I'm going to do it right. I've always been, again, kind of the opposite to that of if I don't see the point in doing something,
you're not doing it.
I'm not doing it.
Yeah.
For example, I did the reason why I'm now 22 and a graduate rather than 21 and a graduate is I failed my first year of A-levels, but it's because I did psychology, English, literature and art. And art I got because, you know, I'm learning how to draw. Again, technical skills that can be transferred across. English, I did not see how that equated into architecture at all. And psychology, that was just a throwaway. I was like, why? I ended up coming out with, I think it was like DDC, something like that. And obviously you have to pass all three to get in. And I only passed one. So, but then, again, it was that thing of another door closes but another one opens, being able to go into that technical course, which then got me into, and I was like, okay, there's skills here that I can move across when I go into university and apply. So
it's even like Scott studying English would help him with a lot of writing and going into writing reports and stuff, etc. for a firm. Like for me, I studied art, graphics and maths, which were like the three subjects that I knew I needed to take for architecture. Like maths was one of them ones where it was like, this is recommended, you should study maths. But to be fair, we haven't really done too much math.
The interesting thing, I actually had a conversation with one of the tutors in first year, so it was a long time ago, and we were talking about this, and this whole idea of having to have like an English, an art, and some kind of mathematics or a science background is complete fiction. If your portfolio or if your personal statement is good enough to study architecture, you will get in. As long as you've got your UCAS points, you can study whatever you like. And I think that goes to prove, like, with what I did. Like, what I did, it was the first year in the UK it was done. So, for all I know, I could be one of the first people to get on to study architecture and pass Part 1 architecture with that BTEC. So, you know, there's no set route to it. You can go whichever way you want.
But then it can work both ways. Say if you did study English, psychology and sociology at A-levels, you're not necessarily going to have that creative side to you when you go into studying architecture. Whereas for me, I always encourage people to study coursework based subjects at A-levels. So I studied art and graphics, which set me up really nicely for university because I'd already studied two coursework subjects. I knew kind of like the workload, the structure. It kind of already started to make me a little bit more creative and thinking more of like an architect. And then that set me up quite nicely going into university. I
always think, though, that with things like that, if you don't know that you want to study architecture by the time that you've picked your options for secondary school or picked what you want to do at college, the likelihood of you going into architecture is very minimal. Because you have to have that mindset, like you say, of being creative, having some kind of idea how to set your project off. Yeah. Which is interesting, like saying about Scott getting in like by accident. Okay, he got through clearing and stuff like that, but he was already working in practice, so he had an interest in it. So there was always that background of what he'd already worked in before he started to study it. So.
But then it can work both ways because I feel like if you work hard enough but even though you don't have the creative and the artistic subjects from A-level that take you into architecture, if you work hard enough in architecture, you can become an architect for sure. It's like anything in life, really. Yeah,
I mean, architecture is one of those things where you can learn to design. You can teach yourself how to design. That's drawing's one of those things. Again, if you practice it, you can learn how to draw it. But sometimes
you just don't have that natural.
Sometimes you just need that natural flair where you can just look at something and go, okay, what if you try that? And I think that is. You get that from being a graduate, I think, a lot of the time. Because, like I said, when I was in last Thursday, I'd see a piece of work and I'd be like, what if you tried that? Yeah. And some people would be like, how did you think about that? And I was like,
that's the same with me.
That's just like, you know, it's like we're almost conditioned through university where when you're there, you don't realise that you're being conditioned. But then when you get out into the real world and you're practicing, you realise. It's interesting.
Yeah, so talking about third year, obviously you were in last week as a visiting, would you call yourself a visiting tutor?
I suppose, yeah.
Talking about your work, etc. And it's really good insight to see your work. I'll put some of his stuff up on the screen from his Instagram. Do you want to plug your Instagram, Marsha?
Yeah, it's art arch.jmb. So
cool. So Josh is in the same studio as I am now. So when he graduated last year, he's in the same studio as what I'm doing now. Talking a bit about your work, like how did you start? Where did all the what happened?
Yeah. So what happened is a good way of starting it. So should
we talk about the structure a little bit?
Yeah. So the structure of the studio was exactly the same as your kind of stuff. So it was analysing the context, moving forward and looking at diagramming and mapping, pulling a piece of information out from your initial research, and creating some kind of field diagram, which you can then manipulate with the matrix, so rotating, flipping, push, pull, anything you want. Yeah. And then trying to apply your design philosophy to that to make something tangible or intangible. You could do either. It could be something really radical. So yeah, that was the foundation of the studio. But then when it came to my work, it was very much a reaction to visiting the site.
Which it should be.
Which it should be.
Yep.
I went there and luckily enough, because of being local to where the site was, I'd been there all my life. But it was only when I went back as an architect student to study it, I was thinking, this is a rural place. There's next to no green space. Mm-hmm. There's green belt around, but in terms of actually inside of the town centre, there's barely nothing.
Yep.
And I think that showed clearly through some of my initial analysis.
Yep.
And then from that, it was the design process of breaking down that information, cause and effect, as I stated last week, looking at the network and that kind of things, and building up enough information so I could start to piece things together and create design decisions off of it. So.
Yeah, and you also, with our studio, it's very much, you kind of pick an element from the beginning and then you kind of go deeper and deeper and deeper within that element. So like Josh mentioned, he looked at like green spaces, and then kind of went deeper and deeper. So for me, I started with people, which is quite a, not controversial, but it's quite a hard one to kind of go into because obviously it's not fixed as such. So I started with people and then I went into movement, so mapping movement from above. So I flew the drone, mapped people from above, and then I mapped people from a ground level, so from elevation, looking at the movement from the hip and the shoulder. And then so basically what you kind of do, because I haven't really spoke much about the studio, to kind of talk about the structure, you start with your initial site analysis. Well, not site analysis, but like you start with
contextual analysis.
You kind of start with looking at the site, picking an aspect of the site that may be interesting to you, maybe that stood out to you or whatever, and then you start going deeper and deeper throughout kind of like the portfolio or the module, and you're kind of creating this narrative and this process of how you've started with this idea and you've ended up with this idea, and when you submit your work it should be pretty self-explanatory of how you've got from this point to this point, and if you've got any gaps in between then it's very visible because you just, there is no story, there is no narrative, and we always talk about there being a narrative in your portfolio, which is so unbelievably key. Even with the graphics, even with the colour, there needs to be a story throughout your portfolio for it to make any form of sense and for it to be like a story. You want it to be a story at the end of the day. The
word we use in at least the practice I work in is design rationale. So it's every design decision, or at least my philosophy is that every design decision that I make, there should be a reason behind it.
Yeah.
So like, for example, I was saying last week that when you go through my portfolio, everything that I put in my portfolio, there's a design decision behind.
There's a reason.
So there's always, because obviously it was in 2 books. So the first bit was about the analysis and diagramming and forming the rationale. And then the second book is essentially the application of the rationale. So my first book was called Delineation, which, as I was saying, it means to form a boundary. But my initial word was stratification, which is basically layering of information and data. So it was about compiling information and then putting it on top of each other and pulling more information out of that, which again comes that idea of looking at cause and effect. So by mapping the cause, I could then plot what the effect was on the local environment. So.
And essentially, by us doing this analysis, you will then, like Josh mentioned, you'll then kind of gather, or you create like a field diagram, which will then go on to inform your design, and the form of your building, from plan, from elevation, or however you want to manipulate that analysis. But basically you are then creating a form of the building which has been informed by your initial analysis of the site, and you've now got a reason as to why your building is the way it is, why it's shaped, how many floors it's got, what's the elevation. That has all come from your field diagram, which has been informed by your initial site analysis and kind of your development throughout, based off your idea. So one thing that we are doing on what is key is having a word for your project. Mm-hmm. So yours is delineation, if I can even say that properly. For me, I'm still currently trying to find my word, but mine's, obviously, like I mentioned, mine's based off kind of people, movement, but within a key frame. So I'm kind of looking at time and like events within time. So a lot of kind of Bernard Schumi stuff, which you've done some research in yourself, looking at kind of the concept of events. And so my word is going to be something to do with framing, something to do with key framing, but I kind of want to think of like quite a cool word that will kind of describe it as a whole, rather than just the word framing, because I think that just doesn't sound great.
It was like what I said last Thursday. My process of doing that was taking what I'd kind of consider at the early stages as like a basic word. So it was like layering. For me, layering was very basic and very broad. Layering can be, putting one thing on top of another, or a different sheets. There's loads of different ways you could interpret it. Yeah. So for me, it was about looking at layering and then thinking, how can I bring that more into my concept? So that's where stratification came from. So layering of data. I was looking at historical data, cause and effect. So it's things that I could plot. But then where the delineation is that it came from was that I was thinking, if I'm using all of this information to create a field diagram, my field diagram is going to have a direct design influence on my building, which means I'm going to form some kind of outline or boundary, which is where delineation come from, which is to plot a boundary from data.
And did you have any work or architects that inspired you to do that?
Preston Scott Cohen from America. He does a lot of descriptive geometry stuff, and especially for a studio like Plasticity or
in situationist is what we're called.
In situation.
Not sure what it means, but it sounds cool.
Somebody like that is fantastic at descriptive geometry. So pulling geometry out of it's basically like a mass of geometry. So like how I had that crazy field diagram where I had the big rotations and stuff like that. I could then pull the geometry out of that using his methods and applying that. And then you've got people like Daniel Libskind, obviously, with his
is it Libskin or Libskind? Is it a silent D or
it depends.
I've said it wrong a few times. I've checked myself.
Libskind, I'd say Libskind, but
I'd say Libskind as well.
Libskind.
But because it's got a D on the end, I feel like I should say Libskind.
Yeah.
And then I start confusing myself, and then I'm like presenting. I'm like him,
Daniel. You can say it either way.
Yeah. Because I feel like precedents are vital, especially in third year.
Yeah.
Having analysis of not just architecture, not just buildings, but books, theory, process. It is absolutely vital for third year, and that's something that stood out to me a lot this year.
Yeah.
So for me, I've been reading, like I keep mentioning, I've been reading loads of books, and I've got loads of quotes from books, got loads of diagrams from books, and this is all information. It's kind of like I'm building up like a database that is going to help me form and back all my ideas. So like we say, having design rationale, there's a reason as to why you're doing everything. To have architects and books and theories to back that up as well, then you're onto a winner, and that's that. Yeah, that is exactly what you want as a third year architecture student.
So I focused my precedents. If I remember from my book, I had 4. So I had Libskind, which was very much like the artistic process to it. So how my initial research was going to have an impact on my design decisions. So like the example I gave last Thursday was about the windows at the Jewish Museum, that kind of thing. So that was a direct design decision from him. And then Preston Scott Cohen was obviously more my drawing technique and the formation of my field diagram, that kind of thing, the descriptive geometry. And but then I also looked at, for example, morphosis, for a more visual representation of my work. Yeah,
hybrid
drawings, that kind of thing. And then I am pay for a more technical side of it, because my form was one of those things where it looked cool, but technically it was a nightmare. So I needed something to back up the rhetoric for that and the rationale that would make it buildable, because our studio was eventually broken up into, you could do building and then it was like I can't remember what the other two were, but I ended up doing a building because although I found it interesting to look at the conceptual side, for me I always see an architecture project as having a building as an end product.
Yeah.
So that's why I did that. So I needed to make it buildable, although it was really conceptual. Yeah,
and then that becomes a good challenge for you to make something that is very conceptual. Yeah. And then you've got that, you've built up them skills, and especially with your technical drawings, you've brought in your technical book, which actually helped you to get a job in the end. Yeah. Which we'll probably cover now. So how did you get your job from the grad show? Obviously, building up to the grad show, you've done your portfolio 1, you've done your portfolio 2. Yeah. So just to cover a bit about the portfolio 2, that is basically just the designing a building from the form that you've gathered from portfolio 1, which is all from your field diagrams, etc.
The application of all your analysis and diagramming, that kind of thing.
And then at the grad show, you present your portfolio 1, your portfolio 2, all your technical drawings, and then you've got, so you'd normally pick, say, like you'd have a few visuals up on the wall.
I had 6
visuals.
There's about
up
6
on the
each,
wall.
yeah, something like that.
Yeah, and then architects come in, everyone comes in and has a look at your work. You have your business cards up. I went last year, and me and Jacob just picked up like hundreds of business cards just to get some inspiration for this year. Yeah. And you managed to get a job from. Yeah. So did you apply for a job and then the person came in and found your work, or did this person literally come in, saw your work and we want him?
Yeah, pretty much. When I went to the degree show, it was always like said to be one of those things where you expect it to be like you stand by your work and loads of people will be interested. You'll be having conversations about it, and I stayed for like an hour. I was like, nobody's interested. I thought nothing of it. In fact, I was quite disappointed actually after. Not nothing to do with the uni or anything like that. It was just my expectations of what I was going to get from the degree show was a lot different. And thought nothing of it. Applied for a couple of jobs. Then I got an email from the head tutor for the year, and it was one of the architects came last week, saw some of your drawings, and they're interested in you working for them. And my first reaction was to go into the group chat, and I was like, has everybody else got this email, or is it just me? And everybody was like, what email? And I was like, okay. This is real. Okay. This is real. So then I was like, okay. So went on Google and looked at the projects that they worked on. Some of it was local, some of it was conceptual, because my initial reaction after being in the studio I was in was I wanted to go into somewhere that was really conceptual, just because that's the side of the design that I really enjoyed.
And that's kind of what we've been pushed throughout third year as well.
Yeah. And then I applied for it, emailed back, and I heard back within like 2 or 3 days. It was like, cool, can you come in for an interview end of the week? I was like, yeah, cool. Went for an interview lasted like 20 minutes, half an hour. It was pretty much me and the architect that I now work with, just going through my portfolios. Watch this, explain to me a bit about this. What do you expect from wherever you're working? And I was like, conceptually, I want to work conceptually on projects, but also I want to further my technical understanding of a project.
Yeah, for sure.
Which is partly where, although the background that I came from is where I struggled in third year, because it was, knowing the technical side is one thing, but applying it is a whole different field.
I personally hate it.
Because, well, at the moment where I sit at work is around all the architectural technologists. So I work with the architects, like formulating some of the concepts, but then I get to see how the technical side is applied to it. But after I went for my interview, I heard nothing for like 2 or 3 weeks, and I was thinking, obviously I haven't got it, so I was like, it's time to probably start applying for jobs now. And then at the blue I got an email, and it was the internal review's complete, what's your wage demands? And I was like, anywhere between 18 and 20,000, which I think is fair. It's the low end for a graduate part one. And then...
Yeah, do you have... I get this question a lot about money.
Yeah.
And how much part one, part two, part three. Do you have any idea what like a rough boundary is for a part one graduate architect?
18 to 22,000, I'd say.
Is that based on location, the type of firm, or is that literally just across the board?
It's a mixture of location, experience. So, if you got 5 years already in practice and you're a part one architectural assistant, the likelihood of you getting paid more money is a lot more.
Yeah, because you've got the experience.
Yeah. For me, I said 18 to 20,000, and it doesn't bother me. I got offered 19. And the reason why I actually said in my email to them, I would be happy with 19,000, but that's because I would take 18, but I travel like 30 something miles round trip a day. So for me, it was more of a travel thing. I was like, with how far I'm traveling to get to work,
want a little bit more.
I want a little bit more to cover that cost.
Yeah.
So I stated that to them, and they was like, okay, that's fine. I heard nothing back for like 24 hours. And then
I bet you were thinking, God, I should have
again,
probably said 18,000.
Yeah, I was thinking, you know what? I kind of was, but I was thinking at the same time, I know my worth.
Yeah.
I'm not just going to I'm not just going to take less money just to get a job. Which is why now, the only time that I would take less money, so the only time that I would take 18,000 now, is if wherever I'm working was easier to get to. So, for example, if I could hop on a train and get into Birmingham in 20 minutes, I'd be like, okay, I'll take 18,000. It's £5 on the train a day, that's fine. But, when I'm paying like 50 quid every week or two for petrol, I'm like, I need the extra money. Yeah. So, I heard nothing for like a couple of days, and I was thinking, oh crap, maybe I should have, dropped how much I asked for. And then I got an email back saying, can you start Monday? I was like, okay, that's pretty quick. And this was on like a Thursday, and I was like, yeah, no problem. Yeah. And then the next day I got a letter through the post with the offer, and I started on Monday. I was like, okay.
Then you think that I've just been at uni for 3 years and it's all just come together in one email. Yeah. It's like, for me, it was like the realisation of when I got my email, I got an unconditional offer for BCU. And when I got that email, I was thinking, first of all, I've worked my absolute balls off throughout A-levels to do well. Because I won't say I'm naturally clever, but I've had to work hard. Yeah. So like studying maths, I had to work really hard. I wasn't naturally good at maths. I just had to graft. And it was that moment when you get that email and you're like, shit, I'm going to uni to study architecture. And it's like, you've worked your whole life for it, and then it's happened. And then
I had an interesting path when I got accepted to BCU, because obviously I'd done the technical course and stuff, and I'd applied, and at that point we hadn't got the final grades, because a lot of the time you don't, and it's normally an unconditional based on, it's normally a conditional based on the grades that you get after you finish your A-levels or whatever. So my projection was D star, D, which is like the equivalent of like double A star A. Cool. For the BTEC that I got, which I ended up getting, but I actually ended up getting onto BCU solely on my personal statement. I got an unconditional on that. I showed no portfolio, had no interview.
I didn't show anything.
No, there was just like sent off my personal statement, my predicted grades, and there was like, yep, there you go, unconditional offer. I was like, fantastic.
So this is something people have asked me as well, applying for university, about personal statements, about interviews, about portfolios. And something that I always say to people is just show that you are interested in the subject, show that you are passionate and you wanna be an architect. I feel like that is the most important thing. At the end of the day, they want students that are going to be passionate, they're going to be working hard, they're actually interested in the subject, they're not just doing it for the sake of it and they feel like it sounds good. And that's like the one piece of advice I'd give to people.
One of the tips that I got when I was in college, and I've used it to this day on essays, job applications, is that the two things that should stand out in everything that you write is the first line and the last line. Because a lot of the time when you apply for a job, it's never going to be the architect that gets the application, it'll be the secretary. And if they don't find the first thing that you say interesting, or the last thing that you say interesting, they're not going to forward it on. Because the first thing that you say on anything should be the thing that grips the person, and the last thing should be the thing that makes them remember you. So like I always wrote when I was doing my personal statement, the first line and the last line, and then everything that came in between.
Yeah.
So
It's a load of waffle in between.
Yeah, I mentioned Renzo Piano, Norman Foster, angles of windows, and God knows what. And I tried to get as much technical information about architecture as I could in there to show that the background that I had, I could apply to it, and it wasn't just, you know.
It's like for me, I didn't know anything about architecture
Yeah.
when I was applying. So I think the one I'd been to Valencia, you know, Santiago Calatrava. Have you heard of him?
Yes.
So he's done work in Barcelona, I think, etc. He's a very famous architect around Spain. I went to Valencia and I literally fell in love with this place.
Yeah.
Unbelievable. I can't remember what exactly it's called. I think it's like the Arts and Science Museum or something in Valencia. I went there, and then in my personal statement I talked about my experience going there. I talked a bit about Santiago Calatrava because I bought books, etc. It showed pictures of my experience, and I think that's kind of what, because I showed that I was actually this experience was like such a big thing for me. I feel like that stood out for me because it was like unreal.
At the end of the day, the end point of any design is the influence it has on people. So if you can be conscious enough to understand the reaction that you've had to architecture, you set yourself up very well to be able to make decisions based on your designing. So I think
it's all about
that's
designing
crucial.
for people.
Yeah, if you can understand how your design is going to influence somebody, then you're kind of set, really.
Yeah.
That's where a concept comes from. So
Cool, should we dive into the Q&A?
Yeah.
We've got some good questions. Apologies, I'm a little bit ill, so my throat is like proper sore and I'm coughing away. Is studying architecture worth it? That's like a proper bold first question.
Is it worth it?
And are you carrying on with the other parts?
So I am carrying on with the other parts, but obviously that's not only because eventually I want to be an architect. I want to go into tutoring, which means that I need some form of master's qualification to do it post-compulsory, so in university. Is it worth it? I'd say yes, but you have to make sure that it's what you want to do, because it is one of those things that when you invest the time, for me, I have looked at it sometimes and I've gone, am I really happy with what I do? But then I'm thinking, I've invested so much time and so much blood, sweat and tears to be here. Like, yeah. It's one of those things where with university, you stress. But for me, whenever I used to go for like summer break, I'd be like, I miss the stress. Somehow I miss being stuck in that deadline cycle and always having something to do, something to think about. So, and work's very different in the sense of you go in, you do your work, you come home, and that's it. You don't have to think about it. You don't have to think about the next day, what you're going to be doing. So it's slightly more relaxed in that sense, but I do prefer university environments.
It's weird because it's exactly the same with me. I love a challenge, and studying architecture is just like the biggest challenge you could probably ask for. Like a lot of people ask me, what is it like studying architecture? Do you have much time to socialise? Blah blah blah. Yeah, it's. But this is why I do the podcast. This is why I give people experiences, etc., from like, people's different points of view, to give people an idea of what it actually is like studying architecture, because it's crazy. I don't think people understand how crazy of a course it is. And like I keep saying, you've got to, I feel like maybe you don't know if you want to be an architect or not while studying architecture, but you've got to be dedicated. You've got to be really interested in the subject to even just get through the course, because if you're not bothered about it, if you're not bothered about the grade, if you're not kind of thinking about the end goal. So for me, I'm always thinking about having my own architecture company, and that's what keeps me going every day, pushing through.
I'd say from personal experience and from everybody that I've spoke to, if you don't at some point question why you're studying architecture at 4 in the morning, you're doing something wrong. Like I've so 2 stories. I've slept in university before doing work on a table in the Curzon building at like 4 o'clock in the morning. We were lucky enough that they let us into a room. We had a projector up. We was watching Hot Fuzz at like 2 o'clock in the morning, doing work, making models. So that was pretty funny. And another story was, it was the night before one of the portfolio submissions, and I realised that I hadn't done my technical model, which had to be like a relatively large scale. So I ended up doing it at 1:50, which made it like, I don't know, it's about that big, something like that. And I realised this at like 3 o'clock in the morning. I was like, okay, this is a problem there. This is a problem. I'm not going to get laser cutting. It's got to be in for 10 o'clock. So I was like, right, I've got to buckle down. This needs to get done. So I spent like an hour doing this model. I got it to a good standard. My mate's printing got stuck on the printer because he was still printing his portfolio. I pulled it out, took a step back and stood on the model. And I was like, I've now got 5 hours to throw something together to submit tomorrow. Yeah. And it was one of those things where I look back now, and at the time it was like, why am I doing this? But now I look back and I'm like, but I did it. That's all that matters. As long as you do it.
Yeah. You don't ever give up.
No.
There'll be so many times where you want to give up on studying architecture, but never give up, because I feel like it is weirdly rewarding. Mm-hmm. The moment you hand in your portfolio, the moment you even do a presentation, it's like, I've worked my absolute bollocks off for this, and I feel like that's what stands out to all other courses. There's not that satisfaction after working so hard for something and for it to finally pay off. And obviously for you going into a firm, I bet it was like, the past 3 years has been worth it.
Especially when I look at like first year, for example. Like I remember one of the projects from first year. I think it was project 3. We had to design a restaurant somewhere in, I think it was the Jewellery Quarter, on a canal. Yeah. And I'd really struggled with this project all the way through. And it got to the point where I was still drawing the elevations the day of the review, like at 6 o'clock in the morning, knowing that I had to be there for like 10. And people were getting up in the house, getting ready to go to work. I'd done an all-nighter. I was still sat there drawing elevations with like 3 hours left. I was like, okay, right, I'm done. Quickly scan it in, to the point where like I was cutting up the drawing so it'd fit on my A3 scanner because it was A2. Yeah. Like getting on the train, piecing it together, photoshopping it on the train, and then printing it when I got into university.
So many people do that though as well. I don't think, like, for me, I'm so meticulous in the fact that I want to keep on top, so I'm not ever doing that. So for me, I've never actually had a situation where I've been like doing something on the day, or I've had a couple. I don't think I've done one all-nighter yet. I've done quite a few. I think the latest I've been up was 6. Yeah. And that was doing a model the night before presentation. So I think I started the model at like 2 in the morning, and then I had the presentation at 10, and I finished that at like 6.
First and second year, I did a couple of all-nighters.
But then you kind of realise that it's not sustainable, and it just ruins you.
Third year, everybody in my friendship group turned around and was like, we are going to make sure nobody does an all-nighter. Yeah. We're on top of our work at all times. Even if like we have to spend the whole day before and we've got something planned, every spare 10 minutes you get, you're doing work. So like we'd get together, like the 3 of us, and we just work for like a day solid. Yeah. So like little things like that, just sticking around with your friends, and was massive.
Life saving.
Massive, yeah.
Yeah. Right. Next question: tips for cultural context essay writing. Have you got any tips for that?
Don't do something that's easy, in a sense. Yeah. Pick something that's going to be slightly controversial. And somebody should pick up your dissertation and kind of go, oh, okay. So like I was saying about mine was all about the political, how politics has influenced architecture, which was a challenge.
Yeah, which could be quite controversial as well.
Which can be very, especially with like Brexit and that kind of thing now, which I had to go into. Yeah. Because I basically set it as past, present and future. And obviously the future of architecture is based in a society on Brexit, unless something happens in the vote. But so that was a very big challenge for me, because I've always been taught that like when you write an essay, it should be an idiot's guide. So if you're talking about architecture and, for example, politics, you should have to explain both and how they influence each other. So I was trying to learn about politics while talking about architecture, so it was like a balancing act. I was like, yeah. So that's probably my main tip. If you talk about something, explain it. Don't just mention it, otherwise people aren't going to understand. You have to be under the idea that whoever's reading it does not understand anything that you're saying. So.
And don't just describe. Yeah. Analyze as well. Analyze, because it's our essays now mainly based off analysing, being analytical, including diagrams in your essays, your dissertations or whatever they are. But analysing is key. don't just describe, because you can very easily just describe a book you've read. You can describe a certain topic, but you need to be analytical with it. You need to be quite clinical. Try not to blabber on too much, because it's very easy if you say you've got a word count to hit. It's very easy just to fill that up with just a load of rubbish. But try not to do that, and just try and be clinical with what you're saying. Be analytical. You want a little bit of description in there as well, but you don't want to go over the top with descriptions for sure.
As much as people say you don't need 1,000 references, I'd like 5 or 6 for mine.
Yeah, as long as they're good and they're strong.
Some people had like 13, 15 references, and they had too much to write about. I did just enough so I could I was talking about the European Trade Agreement. Here's a reference for the European Trade Agreement, just so somebody could look at that information and go, okay, yeah, that's right. Yeah, that's all it should be, really. Yeah. So, yeah.
Any architecture books you would recommend for first year?
For first year, I don't think you should be going as deep as looking at books, so to say. You should be looking at processes and concepts. I think one of the mistakes that gets made a lot in first year is that a tutor tells you a precedent, you look at the precedent and see things visually,
and you copy it,
then you copy it. If I could go back and do my first year work now, if a tutor gave me an architect, I want to know what's his process, what's his graphical style, how does he apply that design process to his designs, rather than just, okay, that looks good, I'm going to use that. Yeah. So,
but then you don't develop those skills until second, third year. I wouldn't have thought that way. Until now, if you know what I mean. You're not really, because it's quite broad. First year's quite broad. You're just understanding the general.
Yeah, I think with first year, if you're going to look at any books or anything like that, the main thing that you should be looking at is furthering your technical skills, looking at how to represent something that you want to represent. Because I think that can be the struggle a lot of times. It's, okay, I need a section. Where do I put the section? So I think for me, I wouldn't say a book for first year. I'd say look at as many architects as you can. Find what influences you, research people, how they do it. Yeah.
So. What tip would you give for those who are starting to study architecture? That kind of goes with the previous question.
Yeah, I'd say it goes in. Yeah, like you say, it goes in. Study as many people and their processes as you can.
Yeah. Get to grips with what architecture is.
Yeah.
Just get a brief understanding just to kick you off. Because a lot of people go in not having an idea at all of what they've gone into, what they're doing there, and then someone asks them to print out a plan, and it's like, what is a plan?
And again, it comes to what I said at the start. Make sure it's what you want to do.
For sure.
It's a long process, and it is one of those degrees that because I've got my part 1 now, I could go on and do loads of different design jobs, but you could get through the whole 3 years and decide, I don't want to be a designer anymore. But because of the debt that you've stacked up from going to university, what else are you going to go and do now? Yeah. For me, the only other thing that I would go and do now, and I said this last Thursday, is aviation and become a pilot. But it costs that much to do it. I can't do it because I've already been to university.
I think it's a common conversation as well with, do I go to university? Do I not go to university? I personally say I wouldn't go to uni unless you know what you want to become and you need the degree. Yeah. So for architecture, you need to go to uni to be an architect. Yeah. Not to slag off anyone, but say for a photographer, you could build up your photography skills and experience outside of university. And you don't necessarily need photography. You don't necessarily need a photography degree. Obviously, that's from my point of view. I don't exactly know.
I agree with that. I think for visual things, you can get by without having a degree in it. Almost the same for architecture. I mean, you look at some visual architects. You don't necessarily need a degree to do that. You can study drawing techniques to do it. You can become a visual artist. But to design a building, you need that background.
Yeah, and to get a job, no one's going to hire you if you...
No, I'm talking strictly visually, artistic. And the same goes for photography. I think when it comes to certain visual things like photography, the best time to go to university for something like that is if you know you want to become a lecturer or something. Because you need that academic background to go and do it. So,
where do you see yourself in 10 years' time? That's a dodgy question.
It's a long time. I'll probably have only been an architect for 3 years, 4 years.
That's mad, isn't it?
Yeah.
Crazy.
Probably, I'd like to think I'd be in a place where I'm in a really good, solid job.
Mm-hmm.
But then I'd also like to think that I'm in a point where I'm starting to think about going my own way and doing my own thing.
Yeah.
Because we've always talked at uni of starting our own practice. And to start up a practice with the foundation being my friends is like the ultimate goal for me. So if I can see myself in 10 years' time owning and running a practice with my friends, applying our concepts to buildings, it would be awesome. Because the one thing that's good about me and my mates is that we're all different. Like we're all good at something different.
Mm-hmm.
So, you know, we'd all be good in our own field. One of us would be good technically. One of us would be good conceptually. One of us would be good visually. So we'd have such a broad kind of array of things that we could do. That
you can also bounce ideas off each other.
Yeah, which is why we all ended up with successful projects. Because we spent that time together. And if we were struggling, it was like, oh, what are you doing? Oh, I'm trying this. Oh, I'll see if I can apply that in my own way. So,
and you've all got the work ethic as well.
Yeah.
Which is key if you want to work with someone.
Ethic, yeah.
Where do I see myself in 10 years' time? I'd like to think I'd be a professional architect, hopefully, with potentially my own company. By then, I think I'm probably going to start my own company a little bit earlier. In terms of YouTube, I don't know in 10 years' time when I'm like 30, I don't know if I'll be doing YouTube or not, but hopefully I will be. And we'll still be running the #1 student podcast in the world. I'd like to be fair, I'd like my own like studio and like a creative agency to help creative individuals. Not like teaching, but kind of like an agency to help people.
Yeah.
Maybe a company or a website or a member's website or something that would help architecture students that's starting up, and maybe giving examples, paying people to post weekly blogs, like post architects.
Yeah.
And just do some creative stuff. To be honest, I've always wanted to be creative. So in 10 years' time, for sure, I want to be happy in what I'm doing. I want to be comfortable, but then I still do want to be challenging myself as much as I've been challenging myself throughout this course, because I'm always up for a challenge. I always want to push myself further. And I don't just want to do one thing. I don't just want to be an architect. I want to have my YouTube channel. I want to be doing podcasts. I want to have my own studio. I want to just help people on a broader scale, which I could potentially utilise my audience and my following to do that.
In the future, I want to be in the point, and I think I'm already to the point now, where I know that if I'm in the same job for more than 3 years, I'm doing something wrong.
Yeah.
I never want to be comfortable. I constantly want to be moving forward and finding new things. Mm-hmm. So I think that's key for me. Until obviously I've run my own practice, where I can't really move on from my own practice. Yeah. That's like the pinnacle of where I want to be. So.
Yeah. The final question we've got is, who is your favourite architect? that is like, easy. That's a broad. Easy.
Go on, Daniel Libskind.
Do you think?
Hands down. Yeah.
Why is that?
His concepts, his design philosophy, his design rationale had such an influence on my project that it was kind of obvious that was like my favourite architect, because
that was you. A bit of you.
Yeah, exactly. Like when I started university, it was like Norman Foster, like Roger Sturken Harbour, like people like that. And then I started to like move slowly forward and like trying to do that, and I was like, maybe this isn't me. And then like working in the plasticity studio last year, and then looking at these different methods of thinking about geometry and things like that, and descriptive geometry, deeper concepts, and looking into just the idea behind Libskind's work, for me was just like literally mind blowing. Yeah. So, yeah.
I'd probably say mine is, to be fair, for me, over the past 3 years, I haven't really done that much research into architects, so I haven't really been that kind of person that would know. If someone said, do you know who did this work, I wouldn't exactly know.
Yeah.
But for me, I'd probably say at the moment Bernard Tschumi. Just his process is unbelievable.
Yeah.
Right now it's perfect for my project. It's what I'm pretty much basing all of my ideas off: the events, the framing, the time, the speed, the movement, people. And some of his work is unbelievable. So I'd probably say Bernard Tschumi at the moment, just because it's like, theoretically, it's just unreal.
I always think that, like, or at least with having favourites, having a favourite architect is different for me than having a favourite building. So I have loads of buildings that I like.
Yeah.
But for me, if I like an architect because of the building that is designed, that's wrong.
Yeah.
Because I prefer an architect for the concepts and the design philosophy.
Yeah.
And then I just prefer buildings for what they are, like their impact. So.
Cause it's one thing looking at a building and seeing this building and how amazing it is, and you kind of look at it and you think, oh yeah, it's cool. But then to actually understand how that building has come about, the process behind it. I know it sounds a bit boring, but that is just it's the sick part of architecture. I think it's the process of how you've actually got to that building. So for you, the process of you getting to your third year design it's a process. And I think that's what I think is vital for all architecture students, is to have a process, like I mentioned at the start, have a narrative, have a story, and
I think everything should have a story or a reason behind it. For example, without going too deep into it, one of the architects that I used to look at was David Childs. I don't know if you've ever heard of him.
Never heard of him.
He did work with Norman Foster on the One World Trade Center, the new one in New York. And at first I was like, okay, this is like an interesting building. It starts off with a square and then it rotates as it gets to the top. That's really an interesting concept. But then you go further into it and you think about like the angle of the glazing, for example. So one of the angles of the glazing on, I think it's the southwest side or something like that. When the light hits the light reflects down onto the street at the same time as the first plane hit the Twin Towers and things like that. So even just a design decision like that, if you can tell a historical story through architecture or something to do with context, it's mind blowing. It's the goal that everybody should aim for.
Yeah. Cool. So we've hit almost an hour.
Yeah.
So we'll wrap up there. So thank you as always, Josh, for coming on.
It's been a pleasure.
So you've already plugged your Instagram. Yep. What's it again?
arc.jmb.
Cool. Do you want to plug anything else or?
No, I mean, if people are interested in photography, I've got lens.jmb as well. But
cool. So yeah, thank you as always for coming on the show. Thank you as always for listening to the podcast. Like I mentioned, if you've got any more questions, if you've got any questions for my next guest, please let me know down below in the comment section. If you are watching this on YouTube, if you're listening to this on Spotify or iTunes, please drop me a message at my Instagram, which is at @TomRowe, or TomRowe Studios now actually, which I do have for the podcast. So yeah, thank you as always for watching and listening to the #1 student podcast in the world. And yeah, thank you. Peace. It's always an awkward one finishing. I'm just like, bye.